Hello, everyone. Today we are going to look at the Kugelmass episode by Woody Allen. A note before we begin, this video will be a little longer than the last one. Because we don't have the limitations of the classroom, some of our videos will be short, some will be a little bit longer. We don't have to fit them into a certain time frame. I'll always try to make them as short as possible for you, but some will have to be longer. So this one will be a little longer. We're going to look at what you should have done for homework, the Kugelmass episode, which is a often really approachable text that students like. Woody Allen is at heart a comedic writer, and he uses a lot of that to great effect here. So first, we're going to do some review. I think it's always important to reinforce the vocabulary and terms we're going to be using this semester. Then we're going to talk about the Kugelmass episode, and we're going to discuss intertextuality with a focus on Madame Bovary, which is the text referred to throughout Kugelmass episode. Then finally, we're going to do the introduction for Plato. If the video is getting really long, then we might save that for the next video. So some quick review. Short story has a few characters, limited setting, and a single main event. The setting is the time and place of a story with an emphasis on both. And the theme is the underlining or stated main idea of the story. And it's not just one. It can be many different themes. And we're going to introduce a new one, this time a basic term called the protagonist, who's the main character who comes into conflict with an opposing major character or force, called the antagonist. We're going to focus on the protagonist, which of this homework assignment was Sidney Kugelmass, a professor of the humanities. We're not going to focus a lot on antagonist with this reading because it's a little less clear who or what the antagonist is here. And we'll save that for a different point in the semester. We also wanted you to focus on, with this text, intertextuality. When a book refers to another text in the original story, the term text can be used loosely. It could be a cartoon, it could be a movie, it could be a play, it could be music, anything that artwork. Anything that can be interpreted in a way that you would interpret a text that's present in a short story usually has meaning that should be looked into. I also wanted you to focus on irony, the use of words to convey a meaning that's opposite of its literal meaning. We talked about how it's connected to sarcasm, but also how it's part of the plot and character development and descriptions. So, for instance, Sidney Kugelmass is a well-respected professor, but he's also doesn't learn very much. He is bumbling. He seems stupid at many different points in the text. Or I said a supermodel who can't get a date would be kind of an ironic character. And we'll see this. I'll point out many more examples in the reading today. I also wanted you to focus on foreshadowing. Foreshadowing gives an advance hint of what is to come later in the story. So we need to play detective as we're reading a story. It can help us learn about how an author writes a work and what we should be looking for by looking for foreshadowing. Before we dive into the text, a few new things. So first, the style of this story. It's a farce and a satire. A farce is a comedy that uses wordplay, misdirection, and impossible situations to create humor. I think all that is very evident in the Kugelmass episode. And satire is a comedy or drama that criticizes individual flaws or social traditions. So think for a moment about what social traditions could this story are criticized in this story. Sorry, the wording's a little off there. So I'll describe one of them, but I want you to continue to think about that as we read through it. So one is the idea of the midlife crisis, that he escapes to the world of literature because his life has become unbearably dull. Instead of seeking meaning and improving his life, Kugelmass seeks an escape to satisfy his basic urges. So at heart, the story satirizes middle age, midlife crisis. It satirizes a lot more than that, too. Think of how those ideas could be universalized to beyond just middle life. I also want us to discuss and for you to look for flat characters and round characters. Okay, so flat characters are two-dimensional characters that are relatively uncomplicated and do not change throughout the course of a work. Now, most people, when they hear flat characters and read the definition, they focus in on uncomplicated. Okay, and that's good. That's the first step, though. That's not the only step. The second is what I want us to focus on more, and do not change throughout the course of a work. Okay, that's, I think, the harder to get at and more important question. Is this character uncomplicated, and do they not change? Okay, so do they not have epiphanies? Do they not learn things that changes them? Do they not develop in different ways, right? And round characters are the opposition to that. So they're complex and undergo development. So often to the surprise of the reader. So with round characters, you notice a change in them. That something's changed, they've developed in some way, they've learned something, had some sort of epiphany, and their life is different than when it began. Okay, so keep in mind uncomplicated versus complicated, but also that they need to go through development. And so I want you to think as we're reading, are the characters from the Kugelmass episode flat or round? And I'll tell you right off the bat, he does use some flat characters throughout. So what I want you to think about is why he might use flat characters. What's the purpose of them? Why not just have all round characters? Round characters are more realistic. They're more like us. They're more interesting in many ways. So why use flat characters at all? That's something I want you to think about and we'll discuss. Okay, we'll dig in a moment into the story, but first, the setting and time and the place of the story, let's set that up. It's in France in the early part of the 19th century and New York City in the 1970s. Okay, so with every setting, like we talked about in the first video, we need to focus on how it influences the story and how the story might be different if it was set in a different time or place. So if it was set in Titusville 2017 or even New York City 2017, how would the story change? If it was set in Canada rather than France, or if it was set in San Francisco rather than France, how would that change the story? Okay, so let's dive into the text. And just a warning here, we're going to reread much of the text here, probably a half of the text or more, because Woody Allen is a very complex writer. Even though his writing seems very simple, he's doing a lot of things in there. And so I want to, it also draws out many of those concepts that we just talked about, from intersexuality to irony to something called metafiction that we'll discuss. So let's look at this. I'll read some and discuss. So Kugelmass, a professor of humanities at City College, was unhappily married for a second time. Okay, so I'm always really interested in how authors decide to start their stories. And here it's introducing Kugelmass, and he's a professor, which is, I would hope, a respected profession of humanities at City College. But so we get the first half of the sentence, widely respected. Second half, unhappily married. So if somebody asks how to define you, and they tell you one thing that's very responsible and respected, and one thing that focuses on your problems or troubles, right? It shows some complexity, right? It shows some complexity that we're not perfect people. Unfortunately, his wife doesn't get the same consideration. Daphne Kugelmass was an oaf, and an oaf is just dumb or simple. So I think right there, Woody Allen's defining her as a flat character, right? She's dumb, she's simple. Most likely we're not going to see anything complex or any pivotal change out of Daphne. He also has 2 dull sons by his first wife, Flo. They're so dull that they don't even have names here, and was up to his neck in alimony and child support. Okay, so he's already dealing with this problem of alimony and child support. Did I know it would turn out so badly, Kugelmass whined to his analyst one day. Daphne had promise. Who suspected she had let herself go and swell up like a beach ball? Plus she had a few bucks, which is not in itself a healthy reason to marry a person, but it doesn't hurt with the kind of operating nut I have. You see my point? Kugelmass was bald and hairy as a bear, but he had soul. Okay, so this whole little section here sets up the tension and the ironic elements for the rest of the story. He's complaining about his wife's looks, saying that she's put on weight, and he just perhaps married her for money, right? And that he needs to because of his money troubles. But so he's saying she's no prize, but then we get the description, he's no prize either. I am a fellow bald guy with Kugelmass, and I'd like to think we can be attractive too. But the way it's described here, it's clear they're not saying he's very attractive. He's bald and hairy as a bear, right? That's not how you describe an attractive guy. So he's not a prize, and he's complaining because his wife's not a prize, right? So he says, I need to meet a new woman, he went on. I need to have an affair. I may not look the part, but I'm a man who needs romance. I need softness. I need flirtation. I'm not getting younger, so before it's too late, I want to make love in Venice, trade quips at 21, and exchange coy glances over red wine and candlelight. You see what I'm saying? Dr. Mandel shifted in his chair and said, an affair will solve nothing. You're so unrealistic. Your problems run much deeper. So this is the first voice of reason. You hear him speaking, Kugelmass, and it's all emotion. It's all passion. It's all dreams and escaping from reality, escapism, right? Mandel comes in and says, your problems are deeper than that. No fantasy is going to get you out of your problems. So Kugelmass ignores that advice, ignores reality, right? And also, this affair must be discreet, Kugelmass continued. I can't afford a second divorce. Daphne would really sock it to me. Mr. Kugelmass, and then you could see here that he's ignoring the analyst. So he goes to someone for help and ignores them. But it can't be anyone at City College because Daphne also works there. Not that anyone on the faculty at CCNY is any great shakes, right? But some of those co-eds. So there again, we have an example of irony that this bear of a man, balding bear of a man, is complaining that other faculty at his institution aren't prizes either. But hey, some of those students are, and it just sets up what it's both ironic, but it's satirical in that this does happen, right? I see it all the time. Someone my age dating someone half their age or something similar. It happens, so it's satirical in that way. Mr. Kugelmass, the worst thing you could do is act out. You must simply express your feelings here, and together we'll analyze them. You have been in treatment long enough to know there's no overnight cure. After all, I'm an analyst, not a magician. Right? Okay, so your alarm bells should be going off because hopefully this is your second read through, if not third. And so that a magician is coming later on, right? But you didn't know that the first time reading. Still, if I see the word magician early in a story, I'm like, that's kind of a strange phrase to use. It should ring off some sort of bell. What does a magician represent? What does a magic represent, right? And you could unpack that and say, something that's not real, right? Something that's beyond real, something that perhaps the easy way out, that sort of thing. But that's a clear foreshadowing of events later on. Then perhaps what I need's a magician, Kugelmass said, rising from his chair. And with that, he terminated his therapy without getting any real advice, except to go see a magician. So a couple of weeks later, while Kugelmass and Daphne were moping around in their apartment one night, like two pieces of old furniture, the phone rang. I just like this phrase because I think, once again, we're getting that Kugelmass and Daphne are both, they're like furniture. They're dull, they're plain, they're ordinary, and they just sit around moping, right? So Kugelmass doesn't see himself that way, right? He sees himself as he has soul. So we get a glimpse at reality from outside of Kugelmass's lens. I hear you're looking all over town for a magician to bring a little exotica into your life. Yes or no? Shh, Kugelmass whispered. Don't hang up. Where are you calling from, Persky? Early the following afternoon, Kugelmass climbed 3 flights of stairs in a broken down apartment house in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn. So anytime you get description in a short story, remember, zoom in, highlight the important parts, right? So climb 3 flights of stairs, so out of the way, in a broken down apartment center, right? Or apartment house. So it's already indicated something's up, right? What kind of magician is in a broken down, out of the way apartment? Right? Peering through the darkness of the hall, he found the door he was looking for and pressed the bell. I'm going to regret this, he thought to himself. Again, some foreshadowing there. Seconds later, he was greeted by a short, thin, waxy-looking man. You're Persky the Great, Kugelmass said. The Great Persky. You want some tea? So again, another ironic description. A short, thin, waxy man is the Great Persky, right? That's the opposite of what you would expect out of someone with the name the Great Persky. Persky went to the back room, and Kugelmass heard the sounds of boxes and furniture being moved around. Persky reappeared, pushing before him a large object on a squeaky roller skate wheels. He removed some old silk handkerchiefs that were lying on top and blew away a bit of dust. It was a cheap-looking Chinese cabinet, badly lacquered. Again, if somebody told you they had a big magic box, and later we'll find out, that it's supposed to transport you into a book, the description we'd be expecting wouldn't be cheap-looking, Chinese-made and badly lacquered, right? You'd expect something fancy, something ornate, something of great wood, right? So it's ironic, and it's also foreshadowing. If this magician's using such crappy materials, this might not go very well. Kugelmass made a face and grunting climbed into the cabinet. He couldn't help noticing a couple of ugly rhinestones glued onto the raw plywood just in front of his face. Again, that description just sets up something's going on here, right? It's the truth, Persky said. My hand to God, not just a novel either. A short story, a play, a poem. You can meet any of the women created by the world's best writers, whoever you dreamed of. You could carry on like all you like with a real winner. Again, he's not a winner. He's not a prize. But he can carry on with the winner. Then when you've had enough to give a yell, I'll see you back here in a second. And all this for a double sawbuck, which is $20. Again, the price kind of gets you thinking that if this guy had a real magic box, I'm sure he'd charge more than $20. Persky tucked the bills in his pants pocket and turned towards his bookcase. So who do you want to meet? Sister Carrie? Hester Prynne? Ophelia? Maybe someone by Saul Bellow? Hey, what about Temple Drake? So this paragraph is great because it's taking intertextuality to the next level, right? Often there's mentions, subtle mentions of a text in another text, right? But what he's doing here is just outright saying, hey, look at me, I'm going to name these texts. Maybe you should look into them, right? Maybe you should find out who Sister Carrie is, who Hester Prynne is, who Ophelia is, and Saul Bellow and Temple Drake, and later Nana and Natasha from War and Peace, right? And Emma Bovary. Now, the average person could read this and get the main idea of the text without looking any of those up. But what this does is it creates, the term they use in video gaming is called an Easter egg, right? This idea that if you know what you're doing, if you're willing to do a little extra egg work, you can get a reward. So what he does here is he inserts all these Easter eggs, all these hints that if you went, and you know, luckily when I was young and studying this stuff, if I wanted to know who those people were, I'd have to maybe ask somebody. I'd have to maybe just be super well read to have come across them before and have to remember who they were. Well, now you guys got this Google machine that can help you find any of this stuff, right? So all you have to do is pull up Google, pull up Wikipedia, put in their names, and you can get a quick summary on who they are, why they're important, and just put the question to yourself, why would Woody Allen point to this character? Why would Woody Allen point to this character? And depending on how much studying you're wanting to do, how much literature you want to study, the deeper you can go with that intertextuality. So on the surface level, you know they're all women. You know they're all women who are sexual, right? But what happened to each one of these women? What's different about maybe one of them? You know, so somebody could write a 20-page paper easily on these couple of paragraphs, dissecting why Woody Allen chose these characters. It's that in depth. But what we get is Emma Bovary, which comes from Gustave Flaubert, and Madame Bovary is the name of the text. So let's go to, I want to talk, we're going to focus in on Madame Bovary. And so I want to talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to show a couple clips from a movie version of it. Okay, so this is the clearest example of intertextuality that we'll get all semester. They're often more subtle and nuanced, but here Woody Allen's hitting us over the head with it. So it was written in 1856, and what you should know is that it really signaled a change in literature, especially in Europe. The previous century was all about imagination, was all about fascination, all about the incredible, the supernatural, the magical, right? And all of a sudden around this time, a literary movement begins, focus more on realism. Right? It really doesn't take hold in the U.S. till closer to 1900, but throughout much of Europe and Russia and numerous other places, we get it around mid-19th century. That's when we start seeing Charles Dickens, for instance, and writing like that that's very detailed. So here's just the really quick, rough summary of Madame Bovary, just to see how in-depth, how much you could get out of knowing both of these works. So Charles Bovary is a dull country doctor. So he's getting the Daphne treatment right away, right? He's married to a woman, Heloise. And if you read it, you know that Heloise is another Daphne figure, right? So they're simple. They're what Woody Allen would refer to as an oaf, right? Or later a troglodyte. We'll talk about that. But when Charles is out, he meets a woman named Emma during a house call, and he falls in love with her. Now, if Charles truly was a Daphne figure, he would go home to his wife, Heloise. But he has a moment in his life, one moment, that will set him up for disaster later on, that he becomes a more Sidney Kugelmass figure. Okay, and that's when he falls in love with Emma. So Emma had been in a convent as a young woman with nuns, and she's starved for romance and passion and basically all the things Sidney Kugelmass outlined in that early paragraph. So they get married, but she quickly gets bored by Charles. So they get invited to Charles, in order to try to appease his wife and spice things up, ends up getting an invitation to a ball from a nobleman. So the aristocracy. So this, it's kind of like a Cinderella type moment. You know, this poor girl gets her chance to shine. Right? So she goes to this and she gets her Cinderella moment, and then when it's all done, she returns to the drudgery of everyday life. She becomes miserable and ill, kind of a manifestation of her frustration, right? So she's so miserable that she makes herself ill. They move to a different town in hopes of helping her health, but in the new town, she meets Rudolph and has a passionate affair with Rudolph. You'll see him in the film clips. Rudolph then has a Sidney moment and grows bored of Emma, and Emma grows despondent. She has another affair, but grows bored of him and still kind of pines over Rudolph. So these affairs, Emma's out of control spending, and a medical blunder by Charles leave them broke. So she's despondent, depressed, broke, and starting to quickly realize that, technical problem here, starting to quickly realize that perhaps she's not meant for that fantastical, magical life. Pardon me. Okay. She goes back and begs Rudolph to take her back. He says no way. Then offers such extreme, she even offers to prostitute herself to pay her debts, give him her body. She's unsuccessful and she commits suicide. So this isn't a happy ending. Charles mourns and idealizes Emma. He then finds out about the affairs, and he grows despondent and dies alone in the garden. So you say, well, why would Woody Allen use this text as a frame for his own? And we're going to look at some clips to focus in on that. But definitely we're looking at literary realism versus romanticism, but also class. Okay, we want to look at the class elements as we watch the social class as we watch these clips.